Like I say guys, Dan Dravidi here, hope you're all well. So this video is one of my short videos about specifics, sectors and markets about property and the property industry. This specific one of my favourite topics is student accommodation, and more specifically student accommodation or student tenants versus professional HMOs. Before we do that, don't forget to hit the like button and smash the subscribe button to see and get notifications for all of my new and upcoming videos. There should be one at least every week. Okay guys, so let's go ahead and get started. So one of my favourite topics here, student accommodation. So before we get into the detail about why I prefer student accommodation or student tenants versus professionals, let's go and look at some of the specifics around what the student market is and what the student tenants look for. Effectively, we've got two HMO types of tenants that we're going to compare today. One being students, one being the professional sector. So both are considered in the broad terms HMOs when basically more than one family or more than two people from more than one family live within a dwelling. And the details of the specifics about how that breaks down in terms of liability, council tax, building regulations, licensing and all those things, we're not going to get into that detail today, and I urge you to go and speak to your local housing association for those details for your specific market and location. What we're going to talk about is simply the student tenant versus the professionals, and why I think the student market is definitely a better market to invest in. It's more sustainable and it does take less work overall, and to change some of that wrong perception about the student tenants. Don't get me wrong, they're not all perfect, but let's get into the detail. So first of all, let's talk about the student market and student accommodation. I can only speak for my local area. I don't invest in student accommodation in any other city or town in Norwich or anywhere else around the world. It's purely Norwich and Norfolk. So my opinion, my advice, what I'm going to talk to you about today is purely based on my experience in this location. It might be different for other towns, sectors, types of universities, etc, etc. So don't just take what I say as gospel. Go and do your own research, find your own information and try and tally it into what I'm saying, and hopefully I can help you. So students are people who are leaving sort of the higher education of sixth form or college to go into university to study for a specific topic, which is going to more than likely be their guide to their future careers within their work and life. And I'm not going to teach anyone to suck eggs about what the details are of students, but if you look at the type of individual who tends to be the majority of the target market, they're sort of the 18 to 24-year-olds. They're either coming straight from college or sixth form, leaving home for the first time, or they may have had a gap year or a couple of years working to save up, whatever it may be. It tends to broadly be within that age gap, and majority of the time this will be the first time that they have left home to move away. Now typically, if they are going to a large university, there'll be on-site accommodation. So the first years will go in and they'll go into purpose-built student blocks within the university campus. But this isn't necessarily always the case. And you tend to find that university cities and towns that have had much more growth than they've forecasted over a 10 to 15 year period doesn't tend to have the on-site accommodation, the purpose-built accommodation that is needed for their first years. So straight away, you've got an overspill market in some locations for that first year. We really like first years because we can take them under our wing, we can give them a really nice set of accommodation. I live really local to my portfolio, so I'm always no more than sort of 20, 25 minutes away unless I'm away. And if you look after the tenants and they're happy, you haven't got them just for a year, but potentially they'll stay with you for 2 or even 3 years, maybe even longer, depending on what sort of course they're on. So there's the first year market. The other market, which is the second year market, that tends to be the bigger market to play in. So you've got the first years who are pretty much, if there's availability, guaranteed this on-site spot within their university. And then the second year, they're looking to come away from that on-site accommodation and move to private accommodation. And they would have built up friendships and people they like and dislike, people they've lived with. Maybe they want to stay with them or they want to move away from them, but they've got a bit more of an understanding of what type of accommodation they're now after, having lived in an on-site purpose-built set of accommodation at the university. They'll be looking for their type of property, and some of the key things that will always be a factor when we're dealing with students, it's going to be location, proximity to the university, it's going to be budget, and it's going to be quality of accommodation. Now, when the students, the second years, are coming out of the first year accommodation, they would have been paying, you know, some good rent to the university. So they'll be looking to either match that and get a similar type of accommodation with some of the private bespoke purpose-built stuff being built, or they'll be looking to save some costs and pal up with some of their friends that they've built a relationship with and look to take a whole house. Now, this is the market for me that we do heavily focus on. It's that already made group of friends who have potentially lived together for a year, so they know the goods, the bads, and the uglies of each other, and they're more than happy and content to carry on living together within a private dwelling. And if you can attract those groups by giving them all of the previous points that I listed, then you'll end up getting a group of tenants on one tenancy agreement with one rental payment, and they are creating effectively one household, even though it's still classed as a HMO. There's specifics around why that's important, and we'll come on to that later on, things like council tax. And they tend to sign up for at least 12 months. So I guess if we're now looking and comparing the student market to the professional market, so my experience with the professional market is quite limited, for the very reason I thought it was not a very good return on my investment and a very good return on my time, and it ended up being a lot more problematic than student accommodation. So I'm not saying that my experience is the blanket experience across the professional market. All I will say is that when I've been involved in student accommodation now 7 years, and definitely in the early days when the hype was around professional HMOs, people didn't want to people didn't want to invest in student accommodation because the stigma attached to it. They wanted to invest in the glitz and the glamour of the professional HMOs and the glitz and the glamour of the headline figures. The biggest comparison for me is always going to be the net figures. But before we come on to the comparison, let's talk a little bit about what that professional market looks like. And I say professional in very, very loose terms because we're talking about anyone who wants to rent a room in a HMO. You could have a HMO with 2 bedrooms in it or 20 bedrooms in it. That doesn't really matter for this specifics, but it's someone who is a professional looking to rent a room in one of a HMO property which has got other people living in there who also might be professionals, or they could be students. They tend to either be working professionals, and that can be anything from lawyers to working doctors and nurses to tradespeople who are working in the area locally, right through to people who are on some form of income support. The word working professionals is a very loose term because it does cover a broad brush of the sector. You will find some of the individuals who play heavily in this sector and who makes it one of their core strategies will perform a bit of a niche, similar to our student niche. They'll start to deliver maybe higher end accommodation, charge a little bit more, offer things like cinemas, gyms, that sort of thing, to attract a certain segment of that broad market that I've discussed. But if we're talking broadly just for a second, we're comparing HMO professionals to HMO student accommodation. So straight away, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to get a group of professionals who know each other who are all going to sign one AST. So straight away, I guess the comparison one is group of students already know each other, sign one AST. Unlikely, it can happen. I've actually had it happen with a group of works people, but very unlikely you're going to get a group of professionals who know each other and will sign one AST and make one rental payment, and effectively the joint tenancy is responsible for the whole rent for the property. So that's the comparison first of all. So if we then take that underline, you're then dealing with a group versus, say, a group of 5 versus, say, 5 individuals. So you've now got 5 individual ASTs, if you're going to put them on ASTs, if that's how you're going to manage that type of property, with 5 individual needs, 5 individual expectations, and everything that goes with that. So straight away, you've got 5 contracts to write, 5 sets of deposits, and 5 individuals to check in, check out, and all those various things. Point 2 is bills included. So effectively, with students, I would say 90% of my student portfolio has bills included. What does that mean? That means that I pay for the bills, so the students pay one rental payment, and that covers everything. And that's everything from utilities like gas and electric and water, to TV licensing, to broadband. We don't include council tax for the reason that students are currently exempt from council tax, so they have to satisfy their own the council with their own documentation. And if for whatever reason one of the students drops out, or they don't know they're no longer students, they have to then be liable for that council tax payment. With professionals, so you've got 5 individuals on 5 individual ASTs. Professionals in some of the capacity that I talked about are not exempt. Majority of the time they're not exempt from things like council tax. So you have council tax to pay either on the whole dwelling, but more than likely on the individual rooms. And we'll just now branch off onto council tax, because this is quite a factor. It's something I've been dealing with for a number of years. So you've got HMO requirements in terms of licensing, HMO requirements in terms of the local housing criteria for room sizes, amenity space, kitchens, cookers, sinks, that sorts of things. And then you've got the valuation for council tax, which is completely separate. And the criteria is quite different. And we've had our back and forth over years, over various different properties with the local valuation office around what constitutes an individual room being an individual dwelling, having its own individual council tax banding, making it a much, much higher cost. And we've gone around the houses from things like having ensuite rooms to cooking facilities in your rooms and various things. And we've always had a good relationship where we understand this is something potentially new. So we've gone through the process of challenging, providing the evidence, and then overturning the decision to have individual rooms rated. However, there definitely has been a shift which is sticking, and we haven't been successful when we've challenged the specifics of this, and this is around individual ASTs per room that makes up a household. And if you've got a 5-bedroom house with 5 individuals on 5 individual ASTs, then the view of our local valuation office is that each of those rooms are liable for council tax, and the responsibility of the council tax for the property is no longer the landlords, it's the individuals. So with that comes its own set of headaches. We've actually had a set of circumstances on a row of 10 houses, which I jointly own with partners of mine, where we've had individual ASTs and the individuals are liable for council tax, but they have deemed them the responsibility of the landlord. So they're chasing us for the council tax on the individual rooms. How we've managed to overturn that is the valuation was misinformed. They weren't individual ASTs, they were actually joint tenants on AST. So there's definitely been a miscommunication there. But it's not without its headaches, and it's not without its grey areas, which comes time. And I cannot tell you how much time I've spent on the phone, with the emails, backwards and forwards, trying to resolve these situations. And the interpretation of individual local authorities is different to the next. So it's going to be difficult. But with students, it's quite simple. If you've got one AST with 5 tenants who have signed it, and one deposit with one rental income, that is viewed as a single household for council tax purposes. So really nice and easy. They submit their exemption forms and they're exempt for the time that their AST runs to. And it's as simple as that. So council tax is sort of point 2 there. It is something you should consider, and you should definitely not shy away from, and do not underestimate the time and cost it will come with multiple properties. Okay, so the third point with students versus HMOs. Now, this is a really big one for me. Is the net income over a 12-month or a sustained period of time. So I've had so many debates over social media, over phone calls, in group meetings with individuals who focus on HMOs. And my challenge to anyone really is, whatever your headline figure is for a 5-bed HMO versus a 5-bed student accommodation on one AST, I would always argue the net income, not the gross, the net income will, over a minimum of a 12-month period, be higher for student accommodation. The reason being is, when we rent to students, we sign them up on a 12-month AST. So they're in there for 12 months, and we get 12 payments, which is 5 individuals making one payment, with personally guaranteed from guarantors and parents and things like that. And we pretty much know where we're going to be in terms of the utilities, because that property's been rented historically to the same segment of student and the same period of time. So we've got a good idea what our net income is going to be. Touch wood, my experience in terms of voids, non-payers, that sort of thing with students is absolutely minimal, because you stay in constant communication, because when they need help or they need to understand simple things, simple to you and I, but for someone living out on their own, it's obviously brand new. Things like heating systems and hot water and cookers and dishwashers and washing machines and things like that. Being accessible and contactable is key to maintaining a good relationship. And I'm a great believer that good relationship from the very, very get-go does feed out any issues with rental payments. But my experience with HMOs, with individuals, professional HMOs, is that they tend to only sign for minimum terms, and the amount of void periods in between starts to really rack up. And I would say, over a 12-month period on a 5-bedroom house, 5-bedroom HMO with 5 individuals, you'd be looking at really somewhere in around 10 to 15% avoided income, lost income over the whole 12 months, due to the moving ins, moving outs and various bits and pieces. I also haven't had a great experience with people paying me in these HMOs. You tend to get low deposits, or you tend to get rent up front. But definitely with some individuals, I've had issues with collecting, and we have to go down the whole process of evicting, which is again more costly, more timely. To this date, I've never had to do that with any students. Don't get me wrong, we've had some late payers, but we've never had to go to the process that it's got to the point where they owe us money, we've had to evict. So, massive plus point. And again, not to be underestimated. You may think that you're playing in a market, or you're delivering a product or a property which would negate these types of individuals and tenants, but it's going to happen eventually. As you scale up and you have a larger portfolio, and there's more chance of that happening. Don't get me wrong, the sting doesn't bite as hard because you have more income to cover it. But the time that one property then takes, we have to evict a tenant, you go to court and those various things, it is hugely time consuming. Someone like me who wants an easy life, I think it's just not worth the return. On to the next point, which is the damages and the maintenance. Now, this is a really hot debatable topic at the moment, because the perception is students will just trash your house. So what is the point in giving students great accommodation? Well, my answer to that, and my experience to that, is that if you give a great product, you can charge a premium price, and you tend to attract a type of tenant who will look after it. And that has definitely been my experience with students. Don't get me wrong, we have had issues where they've caused damages over a long period of time with cooking, caused massive issues with kitchens. The deposit that we take, which I now know is a maximum of 5 weeks, does give you a safety net, even with students. And because they're on one AST, they come to one group, there is none of this, well, she did that or he did this. They are jointly responsible. But at the end of the tenancy, it's all or nothing. It's, well, hang on a minute, if there's a damaged bed it's coming out of the one pot, and it's up to you guys to sort that out. My experience with professionals, it's very, very, very difficult to ever enforce collecting money from deposits for damages and things like that. And the wear and tear on properties with individuals moving in and out tends to be a lot higher than what we've had with student accommodation. And some of you guys out there who are doing rent to rent with professionals, those of you who are sort of over a year into that, will definitely know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the communal spaces where there is no grey area, it's all black. You cannot really blame someone for something when there's 5 individuals sharing a kitchen or a bathroom or a hallway or a garden space. And unless someone owns up to it, it's going to be you who foots that bill, which again eats from your net margin. So again, that is something else to consider. And I know some individuals who are playing in this market in the rent-to-rent space, which again makes that income even more important because you're not really getting any capital growth unless you've got a lease option. Again, lease options has its own headaches. I'm going to do a video about lease options completely separate to this and my view and where you should and shouldn't use them. But the wear and tear on those properties, you know, you could argue, is it any more or any less? My view is that it is a lot more than students, even if it was the same. Let's say you were comparing apples for apples for a second. The wear and tear on the property is the same, but the liability and your chance of recovering any costs is always going to be better with a group of individuals, which tends to come from rent through students. It's going to be you're going to have less chance with 5 individuals, professionals. That's the next point. And then I guess lastly, which again gets missed in the whole world of property investing and the rental sector, is you can find yourself in a position with renting to students where you've not just rented that property for 12 months. Sometimes that property has gone for 18 months, 2 years, 3 years. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So in our market locally, the students tend to start mid to end September, beginning of October, that sort of time. And every year it's different, but definitely prior to Christmas, there is a period of time where the students will go on the hunt for accommodation for the following year. And that can be as early as October, late as November. Sometimes it does fall into January, but it tends to be before Christmas. But with that, so you've just had your tenants move in for say beginning of September. So they're in there for 12 months, and you've got 5 individuals, 1 AST, 1 rental payment, all protected. You're pretty content that you're going to get your 12 months rent for the next for the next AST period. So you kind of, you don't forget about that property, but you're not too concerned about it. But here's the beauty: you rent that property for the following academic year, the following September, and it may be the existing group or it may be a new group. But either way, you get a new AST signed, deposit taken, etc., for the following academic year. And the time you've done that, you've got potentially 24 months or a minimum really of 18 months of now tenancy for that property. 1 AST, one rental, a group of individuals that you are content to work with, and you know and understand potentially what their needs and requests are going to be. Show me a HMO which is rented to individuals where you'll ever have that level of certainty. And I don't think they exist. Don't get me wrong, there's some professional HMOs out there where you'll be able to rent to a company and get something similar, and they're great. If you can get those, it's a very similar set of circumstances. Some of the things I'm talking about isn't relevant really for students, it's about the type of tenant or AST that you decide to go with. But the reason why I am focusing on students is because you are more likely to get those sets of circumstances with students versus professionals. And again, if you've got 10, 15, 20, 40, 50, 100 properties, to be in that position with your rental income is actually a very, very secure place. I know I said lastly, but I suppose there is a bonus point just to mention, which is around the effects of your market. So when I'm having conversations with people, my view is always, if we bought that property tomorrow and the following day the housing market fell off the edge of a cliff, what would you do with that? And a lot of people shrug their shoulders, they don't know what to say. And if I bought a property tomorrow and my goal was to rent that to students, but the market crashed and that property was worth 25% less than what I paid for it. I'm pretty confident the student market has shown in the past how resilient it's been to fluctuations and things that can affect the market. And if for whatever reason I couldn't rent that to students because the student market was affected, I have a secondary market, which is the proximity of my properties are also within the hospital. So I have a secondary market that I can go for. And then if I don't, for whatever reason, I can't rent to that market, I then can fall back on things like professional HMOs. And then if I can't, then I can rent to families because it's within a built-up family area. So there's multiple ways I could rent that property. Some of the individuals I talk to, they are buying in such niche areas where they're reliant solely on one market. And I've actually done this myself. So when we can all fall victim to this, where they rely so heavily on a market that when that market falls off the cliff, they don't have a secondary market. And the market they end up settling for isn't nowhere near what they expected. And I'll give you an example. I won't say where, but I bought out of my normal location for the oil industry, the offshore workers. And I bought a property and I refurbished it specifically to rent to these individuals. And it went really well for probably 10 months. But after that period, something changed within the market. This was a few years ago. I can't remember exactly what happened, but all of a sudden, there was no workers to go offshore and there was no one to rent my property. And the market was oversaturated for DSS tenants. So what I was offering was definitely a better product. The rents weren't going to stack up for the time and the management that I was able to get through DSS tenants. So in the end, I had to settle for a family and nice family, sustainable rental income. It just was nowhere near the rental income that I predicted and I'd forecast. And it's because I didn't really understand what would impact that market and if it was impacted, what I could do about it. And I learned the hard way. I ended up selling that property at auction because I just wasn't making any money. There was no capital growth in that certain area either. And that was another factor. There were cheap properties and lots of people go for these cheap properties, these 50, 60K terrace houses with a view to turning them into really nice houses or really nice HMOs. It's kind of what I did. But the market fell off the edge of a cliff, and after I'd spent everything, I think I just about maybe broke even. I think I maybe even lost some money on it when we sold it because it just wasn't worth the time and effort for the money it was making. So again, another reason why I like buying in my location is because not only do we have this sustainable rental market, we also have 2, 3, 4 other options, but we also have excellent capital growth, and we have the ability to improve these properties and sell them if we choose to or if we need to. And there's many different reasons why this location versus other locations has always shown good capital growth. I would urge anyone to do the same, is to look at areas where you've got basically the best of both worlds. You can have your cake and eat it, and they do exist. You've just got to look very hard for them. And you won't find them where the glitz and the glamour of headline figures will be, and you won't find them where potentially the 50 and 60K properties are, but they do exist. So that's one of my videos specifically about topics in the market and the sector. This was students versus HMOs. It's not the most influential video I've done. It's definitely not going to set the world on fire, but hopefully it will give you an understanding that if you are looking to consider to rent into a HMO market or sector, don't get carried away that just because you bring a great property to the market, it's going to rent out. You have to know the market. Knowing the market is absolutely key. And one of the biggest examples I have of this is you could buy a property and you could turn it into the best serviced accommodation block in the world. But if it's 50 miles away from everything else, no one is going to rent it, no matter how nice it is. You need to understand the market. Staying with students, when I entered the market, there was an undersupply and an over-demand. So the market was definitely at the lower end, and students didn't really have a choice. They had to rent properties that they could find and that would take them. And that meant that some of the landlords hadn't improved the properties. And I remember going to look at a property, it was called a 4-bedroom student house. And I walked in through the front room And I walked in and there was a lad in bed. I was like, oh, sorry. He said, it's okay, I hadn't shut the curtain. And he drew a curtain across, which was actually the hallway that I just walked into this terrace. So the lad had a curtain dividing his bedroom between the hallway for the other 3 tenants in that property. I mean, straight away, I couldn't believe it. And then, well, the rest of the property riddled with damp, kitchen was a complete disaster. But this is what the market was at the time. What we have done is we've seen the investment by the big pension funds come in and offer these pods, these ensuite, high-end, nice properties with nice communal spaces and great facilities. But they do charge rents that are a lot higher than we would ever consider. And to give you an idea, you know, depending on when you're watching this video, this may be well out of date, but hopefully, you know, you're not watching it too far in the future. But some of these purpose-built accommodation blocks are like $175 per week, including the bills. And we are typically anywhere of $125 to $135 for an ensuite bedroom. Now, it doesn't sound a lot per week, but you multiply that over 12 months, that's actually a huge difference. And what we're offering is smaller amounts of units per property. So if you've got 5 bedrooms with 5 en suites in one house with shared kitchens and communal spaces, etc., there's only 5 individuals. And if they know each other, then great. But some of these other blocks, you're looking at, some of them are segmented off, so I appreciate some of them 6 to a kitchen, but you're looking at maybe 50, 80, 100, 130, whatever in these blocks. So price point is always going to be a factor. And if you can work your numbers and it works for you to offer something which is not right at the bottom, but not right at the top, or something in the middle, and your product is still fantastic, then great. But the underlying factor that I think is always going to be biggest selling point for anyone is location. Do not underestimate the proximity to the key sort of destinations for students. And one of them is always obviously going to be the university campus entrances. The other is proximity to student bar. So the entrance which is closest to the student bar tends to be the more popular. And some of these purpose-built blocks, definitely in our location, are miles away. We're talking 3, 4, 5 miles away, which, okay, the first year might take, but when you're offering a property which you can literally fall out of your bed and be at the front door to the entrance, there's just never any competition with that. If you're looking to invest and you're looking to decide where to invest and you don't have a university on your doorstep, and so you're looking for different cities and what have you, that is definitely something to consider. Where is the university located in terms of the city centre? And if it's in the city centre and the big guys are building these 150 blocks, it's going to be different to if the university's 5 miles out of the city centre. And there is no opportunity for big student purpose-built blocks, but there's opportunities for individuals to buy houses and convert them. So I guess that's a really nice thing to end on, which is location. So don't forget about that. Okay, guys, well that's it from me. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button and don't forget to smash that like button. But if you've got any comments or any ideas of what you'd like to hear from me or ideas for videos, just hit them in the comments below, and I'll be sure to read them and reply, and I may even do a video on it. But that's it from me, so I hope you all have a great day, and I'll chat to you very soon. Thank you.